Cripple Strike nerf ruined melee in Dune, and I will explain why and how in this video. While I do this, in the background, I have a clip of one of the best melee players on our server, instructed to try his best to try and kill me, however he chooses. I've got an inventory of tier 6 blueprints here he can have if he succeeds. To briefly summarize how melee works, as an attacker, you need to put your opponent into a state of stagger, through means of melee swings or abilities, so that you can initiate a slow blade and deal damage. To avoid taking damage, you press Alt to dash out of the attack, and that is now the end of the interaction. Dashing costs a large amount of stamina, and is only used as a matter of last resort. To prevent using lots of stamina in the dash, the opponent engages with the other in a skilled dance of melee exchanges through means of parrying, blocking, counterattacks, and it becomes a race of who runs out of stamina first. So boiled down, it's a battle of stamina management via means of attacking, defending, and positioning. Some fundamentals to keep in mind is you cannot melee anyone that isn't in front of you, you can't throw swords around like javelins, and you can only slow blade one target at a time. Also bear in mind that it takes upwards of 2 slow blades, sometimes even 4, depending on loadout or skill differences. What you are witnessing here in this video is that attackers are at a significant disadvantage if they aren't within kissing distance, due to the fact that getting someone into a stagger takes effort. That effort costs stamina, and it is very easy to simply walk outside of melee range, which leaves you with higher stamina than your attacker. In terms of balance, this is extremely bad, because quite literally, you can win a duel by effectively not playing. You don't need to learn how to parry, you don't need to learn animations, timing, just dash, and walk away. Melee is completely and utterly non-lethal, unless a very specific condition is met, which is that the target remains within kissing distance and is out of stamina. Relatively speaking, this would be like as if ranged weapons did 0 damage when hitting a target. This is where Cripple Strike comes into play. Cripple Strike temporarily puts your target into a position where they need to engage their attacker, for without it, you can simply walk away. This is quite literally like I do not consent to dying. If you think that Cripple Strike is some magic, overpowered ability that kills people, you are sorely mistaken. I don't mean to be disrespectful, but if you design your game to not be played, people won't play. As I've mentioned before, melee is a dance of stamina management, and is what you would call skilled play. It is not an idle mobile game, you need to interact. So to recap, Cripple Strike is an ability that aids an attacker to meet the only condition where they can apply damage to a target, for without it there is no reaching that condition, unless the target is AFK. Being under the effect of Cripple Strike is punishing, that's exactly what it's supposed to be, and that is exactly how the fundamentals of PvP work. To say that being attacked should not be punishing is an oxymoron. It is quite literally like saying you need to PvP without somehow PvPing. That being said, Cripple Strike was never a one-button press and your target is doomed. Far be it. Cripple Strike can be avoided quite easily by simply being away from an attacker. It can be parried, blocked, and dashed out of, which allows for skilled exchanges among melee. Skilled exchanges that are the bones of meaningful combat. Walking away from a fight and having the upper hand is not, and won't ever be, meaningful combat in any way, and will result in people simply not playing. Let's take a look at exactly what the changes with Cripple Strike are, and how they no longer help melee from meeting necessary conditions. All of the changes to Cripple Strike are bad, except for the duration, which is entirely inconsequential. As previously stated, if a person is not within arm's distance for melee, melee is useless. As of now, under the effect of Cripple Strike, you can dash and walk far enough out of melee range, just as you can without being under the effect of Cripple Strike. For most interactions, the fight ends there. There is no such thing as a medium in this case. Either the target can run away at the first opportunity or not. This destroys game balance completely, because you simply cannot differentiate between a noob who doesn't want to PvP in a PvP zone, or another PvPer who will abuse the broken system to gain an upper hand. The target dashes away, is no longer able to be attacked, and then continues to leave via something like Shigawa Claw. The melee interaction is instantly closed. This can also be used offensively. Dashing is supposed to be the last and most punishing action in a melee engagement, but actually leaves you with enough distance and time to regain stamina. even allowing you to have more stamina than your attacker, which is what prompts the insult of arse-backwards game design. You may have noticed in this video, the attacker runs out of stamina trying to engage in combat, and he can simply be walked around until he has no stamina, and the person making a mockery of the system now has the upper hand. The next point is stamina cost increase while dashing. When you activate Crippling Strike, your character lunges forward and initiates a sweeping attack that debuffs a target for a cost of 35 stamina. This attack can be dodged, can be blocked, can be countered by skilled gameplay. During the time a targeter is under the effect of Crippling Strike, it is possible to force them into 2 dashes. If your target fails all opportunities to counter, and yes, there are counters. Remember, you need to remove from your mind the notion that hitting someone with Cripple Strike is an automatic win. However, now you can dash further away under the effect, you can remove yourself from the melee range. Now that the Crippling Strike can only force 1 dash, this dash costs slightly higher than normal, and by the time your opponent comes back into melee range, the dasher will have regained more stamina than they have consumed, leaving them with more stamina than the attacker consumed. Once again, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but to say that Crippling Strike is less punishing is putting it lightly. These changes completely removed the bridge to meeting the very niche requirements for melee to be useful. I need you to understand that I quite possibly could be the most experienced melee player in Dune. With 900 hours logged, and a focus only on the deep desert and melee combat, I don't choose melee because it's overpowered, but because it's fun and offers a competitive skilled gameplay that ranged lacks. I can tell you for certain that even as a skilled melee individual like myself, I still struggle very much with the meta that is ranged. The feedback that I provide isn't paper pretty, it is all from real game experience. It doesn't stand on buzzwords like meaningful disengagements, but the reality on what PvP is like within Dune. At this point I consider myself a professional in Dune Melee, and as my professional recommendation is that the nerf to Crippling Strike needs to be reverted in its entirety. For with it now, there is no such thing as viable melee anymore. I can also provide feedback on Suspensor Blast, but I'll be brief. There shouldn't be a Crippling Strike clone in the range tree. Suspensor Blast is Crippling Strike on crack and needed a rework. It made for some really bad balance in melee vs melee. However, it also made it possible to escape a melee player without needing a melee weapon, which makes it very powerful and versatile. Since it has the ability to escape melee completely with ease, Suspensor Blast needs to be a separate ability from Crippling Strike. Now that I've explained why the Cripple Strike nerf was incredibly bad, I will address the alleged reason for the change that Funcom themselves have provided. Even if Funcom hated melee and wanted it gone, the reasons for doing so are null. Let me explain. Balance is an ongoing process informed by in-game data and your feedback. My stance is this. With my 900 hours of experience, your interpretation of that data and non-existent feedback are 100% incorrect. I don't say that as an insult, simply as someone who lives and breathes Dune combat. You are wrong. If you have been paying attention to the background video, you will notice the rapier is being used. The rapier is not overpowered, it is useful. The dagger is less so, based entirely on range, and the sword does have a place in defensive melee combat only. And what might sound strange to you is that defensive melee used offensively is actually very potent. And what I mean by that is, all you do is parry and slow blade. Because of how easy perfect parries are, you can completely win against any melee engagement by doing nothing but parrying and slow blading against anyone who is offensively using melee. Now to address the elephant in the room, a broader design philosophy for meaningful disengagements. This part here is very offensive. This is entirely in opposition to what meaningful PvP is, and when you design PvP to be in opposition to its own fundamentals of what makes a fun engagement, I mean no disrespect, but playing the game feels like vomit. As I've stated before, you cannot balance the terms of engagement based on a person who doesn't want to play, because the person who does want to play will use that enormous flaw to have an upper hand in what is real PvP. That being said, another issue is that this design philosophy was valid before the Crippling Strike nerf. Part of what makes Melee difficult and in the minority is that it's easy to get away from. Yes, before the Crippling Strike nerf, it was easy to escape from it. There are a few ways people can get around it, but Suspensor Blast was one of the more prominent ways. I won't describe how, but I can simply show you. It was entirely possible before the nerf to experience meaningful disengagements. Take a look at this clip. A person is able to escape a group of melee players with relative ease. This was meaningful, as it ended up on YouTube. Now that Crippling Strike is effectively doing nothing, there is no meaning to disengaging from melee, because there is no way to effectively hold engagement in the first place, which is what Crippling Strike did. Allowing for smarter and more dynamic escapes while maintaining tension and fairness in fights. This statement is so false, it could not be further from what happens in reality. This sits exactly at completely false. If you are watching this video, the only smart thing for both myself and my attacker to do is uninstall because of how boring and lame this is. To deal with Cripple Strike beforehand, you had to be smart. Or you could activate Suspensor Blast and leave. Thus, you could easily disengage, and Joel's disengagement fantasy held true. Now, there is no tension, there is no fairness, there are no smarts. I don't need to go into detail about this because this entire video refutes that claim. Your meanings have no meanings. The next Funcom thing I want to address is Iggy's comment here. This is an admirable statement and lovely on its own. However, it was true before the Crippling Strike nerf and not after. Now that I've explained how Cripple Strike allows melee to be viable in combat, you can see that having a mix of weapons, swords for when you charge by melee, and ranged for when you have a distance, was entirely true beforehand. Now that you can walk out of a melee engagement for free, there is no need to carry a sword. This Cripple Strike nerf did the exact opposite of the desire that Iggy communicates. There was no such thing as pure ranged or melee, even though range did always have a huge advantage over melee. Even I myself as a melee enthusiast also used rocket launchers. You need to understand that the meta was always heavily in favor of ranged, and the only reason I played melee was because it was fun and viable. Anyone who went pure melee was either an enthusiast or borderline role-playing. But now, there is simply no reason to touch a sword. You can walk out of any engagement unscathed, turn around and kill a melee user within 5 seconds, compared to the 10-minute-long fights melee sometimes would become. Now to address the reaction to the Crippling Strike nerf. I don't condone abuse, and my purpose here is not to abuse, but you need to understand abuse is a reaction. Anything is abuse when you don't understand what the cause is, and in this case the cause was melee becoming entirely unviable in Dune. All enthusiasts and veterans agreed that this was a bad change. The sudden and drastic response is proportional to the sudden and drastic degradation of combat. I've proved why Cripple Strike is crucial to combat balance, and why it needs to be reverted to its previous state. I've addressed the reasons for the recent change and proven them false, and as a 900-hour PvP veteran, there is no world where I'll be convinced by buzzwords that the Cripple Strike nerf is not incredibly harmful.